Okay. Hi, this is Debbie Mann with Festivals and Events Ontario, and thank you for joining us at the Tuesday Talks with FEO. And I'm excited to have Peter Ashwin with us from Event Risk Management Solutions. Hi, Peter. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Deb. Hi, team.
Yeah, Peter has been a partner with us for a while, has spoken at our conference, but just as way of introduction, Peter, why don't you just give a brief overview of who you are and what you do?
We can leave that till I get on the slide. I got a very cool slide.
Oh, you do? You have a slide on that? Okay, great. Well, you know, we're here because we're going to be talking about the COVID-19 Event Risk Horizon, which, thank you so much. It's, I don't know if it's a hot topic anymore, but it certainly is a topic these days.
Yeah.
So, so COVID-19, what have you been experiencing? What have you been seeing? Do you want me to share the screen?
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, I think.
Yeah. Okay.
We'll use that. Hey, Tim, it's just got a couple of slides to show to you, and you know, this is obviously a bit of an informal chat about, you know, where we're at, where we're going, and just some of my thoughts and insights. Because one of the things I find that, you know, we're so immersed in this issue, which is obviously impacting, well, it's devastating our industry and all of you, and all of us in the supply chain around that, and just. While we focus on COVID-19 is just to think about some of these other risks that don't go away and their extent. So we talk about availability biases, means we focus on things we see right now. And this is about just making aware as we look out towards the horizon in 2021, what does it look like? And I'll talk about some of the risks and some of the assumptions that help with planning around that. If we go on to the next slide, Deb, since you're going to be driving the bus from your end, perfect. Yeah, this is, for those who haven't met me before, I use this slide, talk about this accidental journey into major events in the event world over the last 20 years. And I spent 15 years in the Australian Army, obviously Australian by the accent. And the back end of that was kind of interesting in the last 6 years in the Special Forces world, which was quite exciting. One of my favorite moments is, that's not a photo of me jumping out of the plane, but you do see the curvature of the earth when you jump out of a C-130 Hercules at 22,500 feet. Yeah, and I hated night jumping, by the way. By accident, I've landed in the Sydney 2000 Games and was doing this operational readiness exercise. And we're doing preparing and doing resilience testing for all the command centers, including within the games environment, the police and the cities, and how that all hang together. And then I just kind of, from there, just ended up on spending the next 15 years working on 6 Olympic Games, and ended up in Baku for the European Games in 2013, 2015. It's one of an amazing experience living in Azerbaijan. If you've never been in the Caucasus region, it's fascinating. Some interesting neighbors, Iran to the south and Armenia to the west, if you're following some of the news. That line of contact and the conflict has flared up again there, which was still in place, well, still going on when we were there in 2013 through to 2015. So the last 5 years came back and been spending here in the North America, and as Deb said, partnered up with FEO and sit on the board of the International Festivals and Events Association. And it's really about helping you guys make sense of the world we're at and really changing the view about risk. And I think I just want to show a couple of definitions. When most of us, we manage risk, I know you do, but when it comes to actually documenting risk management plans and having written down your risk, I find that most events don't have that, and it's one of the key things. And it's beyond insurance, indemnifications, and waivers and contracts. That is all part of risk management, but it's not all of it. That's managing the consequence of the back end. So risk is about, it's both positive and negative, and its impact on your uncertainty on objectives or your mission. The top one is a definition from the ISO 31000 guidelines, international standards. So it's something that's deviated, and uncertainty is a really key word in our environment right now, because our world is very uncertain due to the impact of COVID-19 and what it's doing to our horizon and where we're going to. The one I quite like is from the Risk Management Institute of Australasia, about it's both loss and gain, it's a deviation from your mission, because everything we do is about your mission and objectives around that. And that's important to think about that. Okay, we'll keep coming back on risks. If we go on to the next slide, Deb. Why are we currently focused on COVID-19 and all its impacts? This is just a snapshot, a survey I did last year with Blerter, is out of New Zealand, a tech company who's in the event space. And we had 163 respondents across North America, into Europe, and down in Australia. And so this is kind of a reminder, when we get back to whatever the new normal looks like, is all of these other risks don't go away. It's like severe weather, safety costs, active shooter, competition in the event market. And I'll talk about that in the calendar and what is happening with all the postponement as well. So these are some of the things we need to keep considering about. And then this is up until pre-COVID was actually happening in our world. Slips and falls and all those sort of things that are avoidable, and we can manage and reduce the likelihood by putting things in place. And I'll talk a little bit about controls as we go through. Okay, good. Right, let's talk about COVID-19. This is, it's quite busy, and we're going to send it to you so you can use it. It's based on business continuity principles out of that and guidelines, and then looked at how I started this about in April, and has gone through different iterations over time. This is the current one around about the end of September. And it's divided, see on the bottom swimming lane, if you like, it's about the phases that we go through from business continuity and disruption. So back in March, April, you went through the stabilize and preserve, that really survival phase after we businesses closed down, started remote working, and that aspect where we got. Then we've seen a little round of, we started evolving, reimagining, reigniting our events, and that's changed. So going into the summer, we thought it looked more positive than we realized, I think both here, obviously through Canada and down in North America, what the situation was. And now we're looking at, and we had this expectation, it's going to be the fall. So we started postponing into the fall. And now really we're now starting to look into next year, 2021. And that's kind of the reality of it, unfortunately. So what will change our events reopening? And there's things called key risk indicators about this risk horizon. And they talk about if things start to change, and they'll give us more of an indication of what's going on. The key one is about what we're seeing now, the ability of, what is our ability? Vaccines, therapeutics, contact tracing, guidance from province and your local authorities about what you can do, what you can't do. And when I look down here on the other side of the border in the US, it's even more dysfunctional than looking at a few provinces, which are different from province to province. And it's also very local, depending on the transmission within the community itself. The other thing is people coming back, and I'll talk about this risk, is this consumer confidence outgets, and it's going to vary from demographic to demographic. The more at risk, the older groups, which happen to be typically a lot of your volunteers, they're unlikely to come back into large spaces or large mass gatherings until there's more certainty about it's safe to do so. Whereas you find the Gen Z, the millennials, they just want to get back out there, and they're less fearful. And this is this whole perception of risk. It varies between each different group. The key thing about all of these things, and I'll talk about in a little bit more in depth about, is the supply chain. So if we are, struggling as event organizers, what is happening downstream in your supply chain? All these other vendors and suppliers and contractors who we depend on, where are they at? Because when we start thinking about starting up and resetting, reopening, whether it's in sort of the spring, the summer, the fall next year, where are they going to be back then? Who's left in the marketplace after this disruption of market forces? So that's something, keep thinking about in your horizon. And out of that is making some decisions, and it's challenging. It's like a good friend of mine, Jim Holt from Memphis in May, they're due to go, they do the Beale Street Music Festival and Barbecue, World Championship Barbecue Cook-Off Contest. So they cancelled this year, and they're now into May next year, and now starting to look at, he's coming up to that decision point again, as do they postpone into the fall or actually cancel next year as well. And if you look at, outside of our own little world, your own event space, you look at the Coachellas and Stagecoach, some of the big events, they're all now into the fall of 2021. And this is trying to de-risk what we think the likelihood of success is. So around that. And that's one of the biggest challenges. And when there's so much uncertainty about how do you manage that around that. We'll come back into, when open discussion, we can always come back to the slide around this and we can share that with you. These are some of the things, my top 5 right now. And they very easily start thinking about from a risk, because risk is not just about public safety, COVID, it's about. So one is, what is the approval criteria? How do we get approval? When is that likely to happen? And that's, how can you predict that? And they're good discussions have, I know at provincial wide with Dave McNeil's doing, but for you, local level is talking to the authority who's going to approve your special event permits. What is that criteria moving forward? And one of the challenges, I guess, is getting the vaccines and therapeutics, particularly the vaccines. If you look at, I was reading the guidelines, how to be phased rollout phasing, and they're going to obviously frontline staff first, and then it will go into vulnerable communities, aged care facilities, homeless shelters, and then the general population. So it may not be until summer next year that the wider population is going to get access to vaccines, if this all goes well in the interim around that. Then it's a case of, is it a 1-dose shot or is it 2 doses? And I know here in the US, or down in the US, I should say, that's where my other base is, and they're talking about having 30 million doses out by early next year, but that's 2 shots, so that's 15 million people. So when you look at that, it's going to be challenging here as well, up on the Canadian side. And then what has this disruption and economic impact, the risk of that, what has it done to our world? It's like, how's it impacting on your sponsors? How's it impacting on those who have been out of work and that discretionary spending? I know that when it opens up again, people want to get out and do festivals, whether it's community-based or paid for ticketed music festivals, etc. But what is that economic landscape going to look like when we go into 2021 around that? The other one is consumer confidence. What is the confidence of people coming back into mass gatherings and events? That perception of risk. And as I mentioned before, you're going to find that it will change depending on that age group and those who want what they are. Like for me right now, like I don't want to even travel, go back over the border or go into places with mass gathering, because I don't know, for me is, have I been exposed to have antibodies? Am I immune? And I don't have a vaccine. And I think all of us know someone has had COVID-19, and from the catastrophic, impact on your families and friends to those who have had it. And I know that it's not a very pleasant experience at the lesser level, let alone those who have been in critical care around that. This is, 4 is about, understanding about our supply chain. What does it look like when we re-emerge again? I think that has fundamentally changed. And I'm sure that, as you talk to your suppliers and we talk about who's in the industry, is like, they don't have financial resilience and there's nothing in the landscape, what's happening around that. And like in my background on the security side is what's happening in the private security function. So these people we depend on, are they going to be still alive, and I should say not alive, but as financially viable as organizations, as business entities? Your staging, your contracting, your seating, your porta potties, and all those other bits and pieces that make the event come together. And then when you go into that talent, one of the key risks for any organization is the ability to attract, recruit, retain, high caliber staff, regardless of whether in COVID-19 or otherwise. And then you put us COVID-19, we're highly dependent on seasonal contractors. What is happening to these young professionals that are entering our industry or been into it, who have so much uncertainty? Where are they going to be? I know a lot of organizations have furloughed staff, have laid off staff. What happens in 6 months? Where are they? Do they come back? How do you rebuild your team around that? And that's one of the key things to think about, is how do we pivot again as I know it's probably one of the most used words right now, is about how do you pivot as an organization from where you are now into where you need to be to go back into running events. Because remember, we used to, depending whether you run seasonal events, multiple events, if you're in a city, but if we're not doing that, so we keep doing them, so we're really good at it. But if you have like a 12-month hiatus from doing it, and then we've got new plans, what are we doing about preparing and resetting our organization to be able to go back into that space? So you've got to rebuild your team. And we're all been working remotely, so building that confidence, rebuilding the plans, being physical distancing applied, and all those other things, and what does that look like? And then where is that stuff? You think about in hygiene, industrial hygiene protocols around sanitizer. It was very difficult for us for a long time to actually get that on a personal usage basis. You think about now we're going to be start competing in this space when we're all starting with these events. Where does all that stuff come from? And how long is the lead time to get the quantities that multiple events in the same localities require? And that's why now is thinking about when you're starting to reset, what are all those things that drive your event? It could be these smaller things that if you don't have them in place, that you're not going to get your special event permit around that. Okay, Deb, I think next slide. Last two slides, just want to talk a little bit about organizational resilience. And I think that's really important. It's, the ability to be agile and adapt to the environment. So there's some positive things coming out of COVID-19. I think most of us have a better idea about how to be more resilient as organizations, what plans we need to have in place to be able to work remotely. Using Zoom calls like this, one of the difficulties, for any event organizers, bringing teams together early enough to go through some of your emergency response plans, because since you are doing build out on the site, everyone's too busy. But now there's an opportunity to get people together earlier, even though remotely doing something, talk through certain plans, and so there's aspects of that. So we need to take some of those lessons we're learning now and make sure we don't lose sight of those when we go forward around that. If you go to the next slide. Thanks. I just want to go back to reminding folks about, this is another output from this survey, and I'll send it to Deb, the full written report, if you are interested in going through it. One of the most fundamental things we need to do is evacuations. And you think about it's a consequence management risk control it reduces the severity of an incident. Fire, active shooter, severe weather. There's three off the top of the head that we need to have plans for that may be required to move people out of a venue. And you can see here is like from a lot of, this is pretty consistent from talking to a lot of different events, is about most of us 40% don't have plans. So it's something to consider taking this time now. If you don't have some of these plans in place, you should be thinking about using this time wisely around that. And also is about this training is we need to go focus back on the training. If you spend this risk-based resourcing and money, and we all got limited budgets, where's your best buck? Into training, making sure our people are trained to be able to do these things. So while we're in this period of this, before we pivot into the events into 2021, these are things we need to return to, is how do we make sure our people are trained, getting ready again, going into that. Risk management plans, make sure you document your risk, one of the easiest things. Thanks, Debbie.
You're welcome. A little quick on the finger there.
No, that's fine. If you do nothing else, I'll give you another example. I was in Portland a few months ago with one of the board members from the International Festival and Events Association, Jeff Curtis from Portland Rose Festival. And they had never documented their risks. And we did a bit of a workshop. My girlfriend was speaking at a sport conference there. And they know what they are. So we ended up capturing about 18, which were the fundamental ones that they need to be concerned about. And that certainly helped them focus on how to keep managing them, because it's like organizationally, like most of you, there's a low turnover within organizing committees for events and festivals. So you have this organizational memory you learn over time, which becomes part of that culture in there. But if you had to quantify to someone as a result of an accident going, how were you managing that risk and how do you map things against it? That becomes problematic because we don't do a very good job of that. So if nothing else during this time is sit down with your team and say, okay, what keeps us up at night? And document those sort of things. And what do we have in place? Like most of you all do background checks. Why do we do background checks? It's a risk control. It helps prevent inappropriate behavior involving minors, making sure we have only the right people dealing with minors. Insider threat for fraud. Why do we do that? Making sure people don't have things in the background. Making sure that drivers don't have multiple DUIs or other driving offenses or shuttling our guests around. And they're all things that help reduce the likelihood of that risk. But we need to be able to document some of those around that. Okay, Deb. So that was relatively fast and furious, but it's part of this I really wanted to think about that horizon going forward, because it's very difficult, I know, for a lot of us now. It's like, how do you plan on all this uncertainty? But document some of those assumptions like I'm making now, and think about how they impact on you, and then think about going forward into 2021, you have some different courses of options around that. Now, is your event viable when you have 25% capacity? Is it 50? Is it 75? You must understand where those key critical decision points are, and making go-no decisions when it becomes to, are we now putting deposits down on contracts that are non-refundable going into 2021? So around that. I think back over to you, Deb. We can...
No, one of the other things too is that I was just thinking about is real estate. I mean, when we come back, are we going to, people will have to consider if their event is in the summer and they want to do it in the fall, will they be able to find a place to, where they usually hold it, will it be available on the dates that they want it, or will they be in competition with somebody else for that property at that time? So those are, that was one thing that came up.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the key risks right now is a saturated calendar and competing for resources around that. What does that look like when you're thinking about choosing dates? And hopefully, some of the cities are doing, depending on city by city or municipality, what support you get from them. Has that changed? Is there a cost associated with it that wasn't there before? Volunteers, what does that look? We know that's different landscape depending on the demographic. As you said, space, because we're all trying to now find out where we can, if this calendar keeps pushing to the right into 2021, is like, you're running out of resources. Staging, if you're in the music side, or you use staging, porta potties, there's obviously the ratios change now because of COVID. So all of those things are considerations for when you start planning risks. So the risk is, how do we manage that? Competing against resources is who else is doing something in my dates. Is the city now working with all the event organizers trying to deconflict some of this sort of thing? So it needs to be some really good considerations around that. It's like, do we now enter into some sort of co-op about sourcing industrial hygiene products? Is there a better way of getting pricing so we're not competing against each other? What does that look like? So the considerations, and certainly in space, people, stuff.
Yeah, and will the suppliers that you normally deal with, will they be in business? That's the other sad side of things.
Right. And what has it done to cost? The model now is changing. There's without a doubt around that. Things becoming more expensive.
Yeah. Those are just a few of the things that I was thinking about. I'd love to open the floor up to any questions, comments. I mean, I see Kyle here. Kyle's been part of our organization for a while. I mean, right now you must be, as a supplier, Kyle's a supplier and a busker. You're a busker, right? Or stilt walker. Yeah. And it's got to be challenging for you right now. And then in the future, will you still, I'm assuming you're still going to be around, but but your industry you'll be stretched, which is a good place to be, I guess, for you, but maybe not so much for your festivals that you attend.
Yeah, well, there's places that we want to be stretched and places that we don't. And that's, I was just on a call last night with a bunch of street performers. And, just as a community, we're all struggling. I know myself, like my revenues are down. I haven't done an exact count yet, but I've maybe done about 6% of the revenue that I've done, in this time year to date. It's a struggle. I'm personally trying to keep my business afloat so that we can all get to the other side of this, because I'm committed to, this is where I want to be. This is the industry I want to be in. For others, it may not be as simple if you're floating an organization, if you're floating staff, if you're like, I'm writing letters to the city, to the Minister of Heritage, trying to explain how small businesses like myself kind of fall in gaps, in support. We don't get the wage subsidy. We don't get the emergency business loan, things like that. It's, but I know myself and a lot of my colleagues, we're doing whatever we can to make sure that we're there on the other side of it. And just like everything else, is to try to keep it as affordable and as manageable, because we're all in this together. We all want to create these experiences together.
Yeah. And I've just had a couple of chats with people who have, one of our suppliers has had to close his doors.
Yeah.
Another one has reduced the size of the warehouse that they've moved because, their landlord wasn't going to be flexible in rent. So, yeah. I'd love to open it up to the floor. Does anybody have any questions, any comments, please jump in.
You can send a question by the chat too, don't forget.
Yep, sure can. I'll read it out.
While we're waiting for those to come in, thanks to Kyle for the icebreaker there. It's like, if you go back to when you think about it, you're planning for the future now. I was just talking to a few weeks ago to David Eitz from the Tournament of Roses about the Rose Parade, because they cancelled this year, or cancelled next year in 2021, and they're now rescheduled for 2022. And the decision that how it's a very complicated, volunteer-driven organization down there. They've got 23 committees, and there's 32 committees with 23 on the executive board, which is a little bit unmanageable. But he had to take them on a journey to making some of these decisions about understanding where they're going to make certain decision points about those decisions, whether postpone or cancel along the way. And once some of these hard decisions are going to come around again, without a doubt, but having those, understanding what those critical decision points or dates are, and working towards those, it helps us make these decisions. Because this whole decision paralysis, it's difficult with you guys, as with making some of these really hard decisions again, going to 2021. What does this mean? So that's one way of helping understanding. Think about these key risk indicators. What's changing is, are the vaccines on track? Are we changing from, in the community basis, from 250 to 500? Is some of those stages of reopening changing within the province, or regionally within the province? And that'll help you thinking about what this landscape or this risk horizon looks like.
Okay, so I just got a question here. And I don't know the answer to this, but how many people received a questionnaire from Stats Canada? Did anybody here receive a questionnaire? I did. I don't know who it went to. So I can check and see if Stats has any stats on that. So, well, it doesn't look like there's a lot of questions. I have a question for you. Why don't you talk about the risk management course that you have on our site? Yeah.
Yeah. There's Cover Your Risk. It's between an initiative with FEO and myself as joint partnership, is taking part of the grant we got from Ontario, is developing a course, and it's put into 10 modules online, which takes people through the journey about what is risk, how do we identify it, how do we do some analysis and what things we need to put in place to build a plan at the other end. Because this is one of the things I've found is helping our industry become more resilient, more robust. And the only way to do that is actually understand a little deeper from our perspective how to manage our risk. And this is what we've got 10 modules, as I said, lead to, there's a bit of video, a bit of material that takes you through. At the other end, you should have a much better and deeper idea and insight how to manage risk going forward. Which, from my personal belief is that's where we need to be as unfortunately, one of these dreaded expert witnesses. One of the things I always ask is, how were they managing the risk? What could they've done differently around that? And there's really pleased, just recently, there's a case settled in the US from Barnum and Ringling Brothers. They had a hair-hung act with these 10 performers fell from 20 feet and using a single carabiner for hanging this mother grid, which is just crazy. But these things in place that should have been in place, so it's focusing on that incident in the organization that led to, over a period of time, something going wrong. And that's one of the things, the course teaches about is just because it hasn't happened doesn't mean it won't happen. It's what's happened in the past is not necessarily a reliable indicator of what's happening in the future, and how are we managing our risks with these controls around that. A good example is, we spoke about background checks, slips and falls, one of the most common risks out there. I don't know in Canada how litigious it is compared to the US, but like a slip and fall, the colleagues of mine cost them $140,000. Only because of cable containment wasn't in place. So we're not tracking near misses. So these simple things we can do to manage risk around that. So sign up, have a look at it. We'd love to have you on board and help you out. And we're a resource to try and help our industry keep moving forward in this regard. You'll find that, I think, here in North America will change over time. In Australia, as part of a special event permit application process, you have to submit a risk management plan. And that's as a result of incidents, deaths, fatalities, serious injuries that happen at events. It's a little bit more regulated around that for a good reason.
And Jay has put up on the chat, website you can go to, coveryourrisk.ca, to take the risk management course. And to pay for it, you go through the FEO website. So, yeah. Kyle, did you have anything?
Yeah, I just had another quick question for you. Obviously, this time is kind of giving us all a broader education in risk and resilience, and something that we all rely on is insurance. I'm wondering if through either your work with the board with IFEA, if there's been any liaising or conversations with the insurance industry and how maybe the year ahead may be impacted in terms of liability insurance or different coverage or things that maybe they might not cover at this time. Have there been any conversations with that event organizers may, or even suppliers may need to be aware of?
Debbie might be able to answer someone from this landscape, but I've had some. I know that obviously COVID is pandemic insurance is no longer applicable. But in terms of where it's at, I'll make some inquiries for you around that, Kyle, with Halson Wilkinson and Kayla from our side. I think, who's your sponsor? You've got insurance broker up there as well that you work with.
Yeah, we work with K&K Insurance, and there's PAL Insurance as well that is event specific. That I don't know the answer to that, Kyle, but you know what? Maybe I'll invite them to come on to this and talk about that issue specifically. So,
yeah, I think that'd be great. It's it's something certainly on our mindset, and maybe the next step in that risk, or building resilience around risk.
Yeah, certainly. It's a key thing about insurance is about financial resilience to your organization. That's why you have that as a backstop. At the front end, we're trying to manage it so these risks don't occur, these risk events. But when they do, insurance is a key part of that, understanding how you manage and make decisions around that. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Get them on and get the experts who are in the space talking about what's on their landscape and what's on their horizon in terms of insurance products.
Did you mind if I ask a quick follow-up then?
Go
I mean, in your experience, obviously you have a lot of experience with risk and helping organizations prepare around that. And I'm sure a lot of organizers now have had to cancel for the first time. Maybe their organization, it's the first time in 100 years. In planning for post-COVID or working within this environment, do you have any words of encouragement or words of advice in how to operate moving forward, how to plan ahead, how they can feel like they have a firm footing?
Two parts of that question. Part of it is tackling how do you plan forward in uncertainty. And I think part of that, Kyle, is, is listing all these assumptions, list what you know and what you don't know, and helping making those decisions. And I think for most of us is like, you might have to plan different courses of action until they get refined. It's like, we're anticipating in opening up until is it in early next year? Can we have 25% of the capacity, or is it based on physical distancing, 6 feet, is it 36 square feet per person? What does that look like, and what will change, and how that decision be made is, can we go above 500 people? So there's some of that aspects. But I think one of the most important things is one of the slides I mentioned about pivoting as an organization, and when you're getting mission ready again. And this is something that we can focus on. This is something we can control. Is one of the things I love to think of: tabletop exercises, discussion exercises, any sort of simulations you can do, walkthroughs, talkthroughs about how do you rebuild that team. This mission, I call it being mission ready. That's the thing. Is one thing you can control is getting ready for that at the back end. You can control your plans. You can write and present those. We know generally what people want from a COVID-19 compliance and health and safety plan, what that looks like. There's some of the things we as event people, we love having control of stuff. And when we're in this situation where we don't have control, it makes us quite fearful and uncertain. So work on the things that you can, and then make assumptions of the things you don't know. And hey Deb, I'll send you some slides. This is another part of this presentation. A different presentation is about assumption-based planning. It's a military concept we use. Is like, that's how we did it, is like what we know, what we don't know, and keep refining it until you get to a point that we think this plan is fairly solid, and then we war game it. Or what does that mean? How do we operate on that? And a colleague of mine in the UK, we're chatting about getting ready, about having an event. So they went through scenario-based training with their team, part of the team on the ground on the side, thinking about what is different from before. What happens if we have a non-compliant guest who doesn't want to wear a mask? Or, how do we manage this distancing circulation around queuing and this space? So it's important as we develop plans, but then we've got to now take our team back down on the ground and talk through all of these parts around that.
Great, thank you very much.
Yeah, no problems.
So I don't see any other questions. Last chance to pick Peter's brain.
Anyway, you know where to find me. It's on my
contact. That's true.
Yep. I just, my commitment in the industry is do what I can do to help you guys, because I'm a process guy, not a creative. And I think what you guys do is amazing. And I know going forward, it's even more important. All these community events, what you do for our communities is we need that again.
So true. So very true. I'm just posting your phone number and your email address and your website for everyone. Peter, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and expertise. And you have his phone number, and Peter will send me information, like you said, and I'll forward it to those who attended this. So thank you again. Really appreciate your time. And yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Ed. Thanks, Dean. Have a good day.
Thanks, everyone. Take care, and we'll see you next week. Oh, next week we have Rondola from Workplace Safety coming and talking with us. So please register for that as well. That's it, everyone. Thanks, Peter. Thanks for asking the questions you did, and we'll talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.